What's going on YouTube? It's Giga here, and today I'm bringing you some cool rental teams that you can try out for the remainder of Series 9 to both climb the ladder and also, if you so choose, to bring it to tournaments. I know we're a couple days into the month, so not the best time for this, but I have been really busy these last couple days, but nonetheless, I hope people do get a chance to try out some of these teams, because I did put a lot into them. I think they are really cool and really interesting, and they do offer a lot of different stuff. So with these teams, I tried to have not only a variety of different styles for people to check out, but also a variety of different Pokemon, where every team has 6 unique Pokemon. There is one exception. I do use Porygon 2 twice, but the ways in which I use Porygon 2 are very different on both teams. So like I said, these are very good teams. 2 of them I have used on the channel before. The other 3 I've been testing a lot on Showdown and will be featuring them at a later point. So I will make sure to include the Pokepace for all of them, talk a little bit about how they work, and with that, let's just hop into the first one. So this, as we've seen before, this is my StakAttack Zapdos team that I have featured a couple times on the channel before. This was made more as a tournament style of team for ideally best of 3. And the idea of this team is it is very flexible and it is very sort of adaptive, where you do have a very focused Trick Room mode with things like StakAttack, Dusclops, you have Incin, Rillaboom, and Tapu Fini, and you also do have a faster mode using something like Zapdos. So I really like Zapdos and StakAttack because they do complement each other very well, with Zapdos having very good special coverage and StakAttack having very good physical coverage. Zapdos at base 100 is faster than a lot of the meta, which does come in pretty handy in the fact that it has access to really big max airstreams, can come in very clutch of being able to pick up big knockouts while getting speed boosts and really letting this team set up. StakAttack is a very good late game option with the fact that under Trick Room it can very easily pick up big KOs, and especially if you still can preserve your max after your opponent, you are going to be in a really strong position. I have been able to come back more than once from a 1v4 using just StakAttack, which I think is a testament to how strong it is. One thing of note is StakAttack is trained to be faster than Dusclops, with the idea that Dusclops can use Brick Break to set up StakAttack's weakness policy. So we can set up Trick Room using one of the 2, have Dusclops go for a Brick Break on the stack, and then have it proceed to sweep. Also, Brick Break is really good really good coverage in the fact that there are so many screens just running around the whole format, and being able to have a good answer to them is great. One change I did make onto this team though is I did replace Ally Switch with Nightshade. There were a lot of times where Dusclops just felt really awkward, where it was just like, okay, I bring out Dusclops, it set up Trick Room, and now what? Like, what does it go for on the next turn? Because I didn't want to go for a Brick Break, it wasn't good damage. Pain Split, everyone was at full, so it also didn't make sense. And so I think Nightshade really gives it good options, and it really helps against really big setup Pokemon, things like Ferrothorn or what is it called, Registeel. Dusclops can now really easily beat them, and I found that every single match where I had Nightshade, I was glad I did, and I never really missed Ally Switch. So a lot of the other Pokemon do primarily provide support for StakAttack. Tapu Fini can use Misty Surge to make sure Stack can't get burned, and Rillaboom has Grassy Surge to provide StakAttack with recovery, and also it provides a way to reduce ground type damage. With ground obviously being one of Stack's main 4x weaknesses, having a way to sort of alleviate some of that damage is really big. We do also have a pretty standard Incineroar set with things like Parting Shot and Taunt. Taunt can come in really handy with the fact that, hey, we want to be able to just deal, like I said, we want to be able to control the game as much as possible. So this team is, I think it's fairly tricky to use. I find that a lot of games are very long. It's a lot of switching, a lot of incremental damage over time. And I find most of the time these games are like 16 to 17 minutes. So they do take a little bit to use this team effectively, but I do have really good success with it. Tapu Fini is also like a really great option with the fact that it can Calm Mind and set up in the late game. It does have a ton of really good support with things like Muddy Water for accuracy, Moonblast to lower special attack, and even Rillaboom is a great option where it does have a ton of big damage output with things like Grassy Glide and Wood Hammer. I did opt for knockoff over high horsepower because I think it really helps with matchups for Pokemon that are really item dependent. The two that come to mind are Dusclops and Porygon. So being able to knock off their items is huge. Getting a one-shot onto Spectriers and lowering special defense if you choose to max Rillaboom is also a really big thing. So I do like this team because it is very flexible, not only in your playstyle, but what you max, where pretty much you have 4 things that can comfortably max between Zapdos, Stakataka, Rillaboom, and Feeny. There are good arguments for all of them. And so it really, I think, rewards you for trying to play a slower, more controlled game. And then you do have really good support. So common things, like common leads to deal with, things like if you need Torkoal, you have Incin with the safety goggles, which plays a really big role. Because if you lead something like Incin Zapdos, you are pretty much guaranteeing that you can get big damage off because they can't put Incineroar to sleep, and Venusaur really cannot do much to Zapdos. So using things like Fake Out onto the Venusaur turn 1 if it doesn't max, and going for something like an Airstream into Torkoal is a really good option. Torkoal is just a little bit tricky versus Stakataka due to the fact that since Stack is going to outspeed Dusclops, it will also outspeed Torkoal, which means that Torkoal will be faster under Trick Room. Other things like Venusaur, not Venusaur, Torkoal. If you are looking at something like a Coalossal lead, your best option tends to be Tapu Fini Dusclops, with the idea that you can set up a Trick Room immediately using Dusclops because Coalossal cannot knock it out, and Tapu Fini is a huge threat into either Urshifu or Dragapult as well as Coalossal. So most people aren't going to want to stay in versus those two. It can let you get off a big Trick Room, and then under that you can proceed to pick up big knockouts. Other things, Terrakion Dragapult, Terrakion Dragapult, you want to focus on Rillaboom and Dusclops with the idea that Terrakion, even at +4, is not going to be able to KO a max Rillaboom, and it's not going to be able to KO a Dusclops. So you're creating the situation where you can guarantee a Trick Room to beat them under that, or you're focusing a ton of damage with Rillaboom if they choose to aim into Dusclops. And even then, Stakataka is also a really good option. Stack with Incin. Some of the calcs are a little bit... Actually, no, don't do Stack Incin, because they will be able to one-shot you. But yeah, this is a very flexible team. I have had pretty good success with it in past tournaments, and I really enjoy this one, so I hope people get a chance to check it out. So moving to team number 2. This is another team that we have featured on the channel before. This is the Hyper Offense Weakness Policy Thundurus set. I really like this team. It got me to Masterball fairly quickly at the start of the season, and I think my initial thoughts on this team have changed a lot, where originally my focus was on Thundurus, but I think the Pokemon, I talked about this a little bit, that has really shined is Ninetales, with the idea that Ninetales outspeeds a lot of the meta, has huge blizzards, has Aurora Veil for support, and it has Ice Shard, which can come in clutch when you have really close knockouts and want to pick things off. So Spread Blizzard, like I said, is going to just do a ton of damage, put in a lot of work against things like opposing Landorus or Moltres, or just really anything that is flying or weak to it. And Thundurus, I think, is a really good option with the fact that you have access to max Airstream after going for a max to increase speed. You do have Foul Play or max Darkness to help Ninetales get off Blizzards. And finally, obviously, it's Thundurus. You do have access to max Lightning. Your other main lead is going to be Spectre or Sableye. And I think this lead was something I underappreciated at first. I'm not the best Spectre user, but over time I really started to see how it can put in a lot of work. Because now you have your big offensive threat going from Thundurus to Spectre, where Spectre is a lot more special. It has much different coverage, where it has things like max Phantasm to lower defense, or it has Mudshot to boost defense. It does have Taunt as one of your main answers to Trick Room, and finally Hyper Beam for good speed control. Sableye is a really good option to be paired alongside Spectrier. It does have really big priority moves with things like Will-O-Wisp to stop primarily Metagross or other sort of users that we don't have good ways of lowering their stats. Helping Hand over something like Fake Tears on Grimmsnarl. Like I said, once again, looking at Metagross, and also making it so Sableye isn't just limited to being partnered with Spectrier, because now you have Helping Hand, which works pretty much with anything. Other options, Foul Play, just a really good damage option. It can help with weakness policy users, and then finally Quash. So what's really great about Spectrier with Sableye is the fact that you are able to one-shot Coalossal if you go for Quash first, and then you use Mudshot. I mean, not Mudshot, Max Quake. And similarly, you can get pretty big knockouts onto things like Venusaur using Quash, and Quash just puts in a lot of work. I think it just overall offers a lot that you really want. And I think Wide Lens for an item on Sableye is really important, just even though it only affects Will-O-Wisp. And the main reason for that is there are Pokemon that give this team trouble, particularly things like Kartana. And having your best chance of burning Kartana really is going to come in like, it's pretty important because you do need that damage. And finally, wrapping up, we do have Rapid Strike Urshifu with the Choice Band, as well as Porygon 2. So this Porygon 2 is very offensive. It has 3 attacks and no, what is it called? And it has no Trick Room, which is something that might come as a shock to a lot of people because normally when you see Porygon, you expect it to have a Trick Room mode. But this team doesn't really do well in Trick Room. And I guess the thought process was we can try and reverse the Trick Room if it gets set up, or we can just try and take advantage of the situation and deal as much damage as possible. And while this isn't a Trick Room team per se, I have talked about this before. We do have Urshifu with Aqua Jet with a Choice Band. We do have Quash on Sableye, and we do have Porygon. So we do have pretty solid ways of dealing damage, even from a Trick Room perspective. So even if you're looking at hard Trick Room where it's hard to stop, that isn't necessarily guaranteeing there's nothing you can do. And so as a result, I think the way this team works, it works really well. It's surprisingly bulky. That was one thing that I was really shocked about because I was like, oh, this is hyper offense, right? We're not going to see it taking too many hits. It's about dealing them out. But it does do a good job of living. And while I have primarily played this as a very offensive threat, there are other ways to play it. For example, rather than trying to proc a policy on Thundurus turn 1, you can use Ninetales to set up Aurora Veil and give yourself really good defensive options, or use Sableye to just start firing off Will-O-Wisps with the idea that, hey, let's slow things down. Let's make it so we can use Taunt on Spectrier to stop my opponents from going for stuff and then try and clean up in the late game. So also one thing that is really cool about this team is while it is, the name is Weakness Policy Thundurus, I didn't actually use the weakness policy too much. I think Thundurus on its own has a ton of damage output. And so as a result, like, I did appreciate the flexibility of that and having that as an option. So it wasn't always, okay, turn 1, I'm going to go for triggering the policy and banging out as much damage as possible. Sometimes it was more about like, okay, let's use Thundurus to get set up with something like a Max Airstream and then go for a Blizzard to pick up a pivotal knockout. And only then can we go for something like an Ice Shard. So I think, yeah, while it is more, and by more I mean while it is a very sort of hyper offensive team, it does have a lot of really sort of flexibility and dynamic options. And for people that are struggling on the ladder, particularly, well, towards the end of it now, at the beginning, things can always be very hard. This is a very, very good team to help you climb the ladder and get to Master Ball sooner than later. We have obviously featured this team on the channel. Random Gaming VGC, who is a friend of the channel, has also used this team. So for people that want to try it out and don't really know where to start, really recommend checking out both of our videos to see two sort of very different approaches on how to approach a team like this. But I think given the nature of this team, there isn't too much to say, but let's just kind of move on to the next one. So this is a newer team. So this is a Perish Song style team that also features two very sort of hyper offensive leads. So you're obviously Dragapult is a big option, and then you can pair it either with Terrakion or Coalossal. So you can use the common strategy of beat up with Terrakion and then have it go from there, or you can go for a Surf onto Coalossal to trigger the Steam Engine, fire the weakness policy off, and get big Gmax Vocalits off. So a couple things to note is, one of the things that I originally thought with this team was using Cobalion instead of Terrakion. So there was a version where it was Terrakion with Clefairy instead of... There was a version where it was Cobalion and Clefairy instead of Terrakion versus Celesteela. And the reason I went with Terrakion and Celesteela was I just felt that Cobalion's damage output was rather lackluster, while it was more defensive, it didn't really do a lot of what I wanted it to do. And Clefairy really wasn't doing much, where I just felt like, okay, this is a very defensive Pokemon. It does help alleviate some of the stuff, but your damage actually isn't super, super strong outside of Terrakion and Coalossal. You're really relying on these two to pick up your big knockouts. And while they do have very similar coverage, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because both of them have really strong coverage where ground and fighting and rock and fire, I think, cover most of the types. So I think keeping it this way makes a lot more sense. So we do have a pretty standard Coalossal, and we do have Dragapult as one of the ways to trigger the policy, as well as Primarina. Primarina having Aqua Jet is a nice way to set up in the event that you have something that will outspeed will outspeed Dragapult, and you just need to deal with it. Primarina also is going to be our Parasong user on the team, with the idea that if we can get our opponent down to 2 Pokemon, Primarina is what's going to pick up those knockouts. So there was also the debate between Primarina and Azumarill, where both of them are very similar in terms of the fact that they both are Water Fairy, they both have Aqua Jet, and they both have Parasong. The reason for Primarina is similar to the reason of Terrakion, where Azumarill just doesn't have good damage output, and relying on it in the end game I found was really difficult, because I wanted to have damage, I wanted to put pressure on, and I really couldn't do that. So now with Primarina, we do have a way to use Moonblast, even if it is our only attacking move, to really get some pivotal KOs. So other than that, Amoonguss is really great. Having redirection, I think, is super important, as well as Spore, with the idea that, hey, we're trying to create a scenario where Parasong can finish things off for us. And having the immediate access to Spore, as well as redirect to get big damage, Sludge Bomb on a lot of things can pick up big KOs, is really great. And finally, we do have Celesteela. This is a Leech Seed variant because of the fact that I thought, hey, we want to go really bulky, right? We want to be able to get passive damage as much as possible from things like Volcalith as well as Leech Seed while we are recovering using Leech Seed recovery or leftovers or Wiki Berry or Regenerator. And this really helped us to kind of get there, and it closed up the gap of what this team really needed. And also Celesteela has really good damage output, and I think that is one thing that really comes in clutch, where it's like, okay, Celesteela can now use Air Slash for things that might threaten the team, like Rillaboom, as well as Flash Cannon for fairies. So I think it provides a really good synergy. Important things to know that not everyone actually knows this interaction is Dragapult and Primarina, where if you use Phantom Force, the turn you use Perish Song, Dragapult will not have the Perish Song count for it, because it's like not hearing quote unquote the Perish Song. So I think Dragapult, regardless of if you want Coalossal and Terrakion, should be brought, just because of the fact that it has a way of avoiding getting perished, and that can really come in handy where you want to do big damage. Also, Phantom Force does hit behind Protect, so people trying to stall out this team and like use passive damage as well are not going to like the fact that Dragapult has this way of getting damage through. So yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. Terrakion is not max speed, it just is enough to outspeed Nihilego, so something to be careful of when going against opposing Terrakion leads, but usually you do want to use Coalossal for that. But I think, I do think the fact that this team has a lot of versatility is really cool, where it can get big damage immediately up front, and then you do have that perish in the end game, because some of your heavy hitters like Coalossal and Terrakion aren't necessarily the bulkiest of Pokemon, so having ways to keep them alive, I think, is very important. So this is a team, like I said, we're going to feature soon, and in the meantime, I hope people play it out and give it a shot. Okay, so moving to the next one. This is an interesting one. This is a dual weather team featuring Sand using Tyranitar with Dragovich, as well as the standard Torkoal Venu. So I like these two options just because of the fact that I think they complement each other's weaknesses very, very well. Where a lot of the things that will scare Dragovich, primarily fairies, are handled by Venusaur, where Venusaur can cover a lot of the weaknesses of Tyranitar and Dragovich, and similarly, Dragovich just has huge damage output that can deal with the things that scare Torkoal and Venusaur. So I think these two as opposing quote-unquote weathers go really well together. And I think normally when you see a dual weather team, it is going to be sun and rain. So trying to do a little bit of mix up on that, I think was really cool. I also do like Dragovich over the common Excadrill just because it does help diversify your types a lot. It's not so much of, okay, it is two similar things, we can go for two similar knockouts. We do have a way to mix that up. And also just the fact that I think Dragovich overall on the team offers a lot more, where even if it isn't in Sandstorm, it does have a way of just dealing massive amounts of damage, and so that can be really helpful. This is the team that I have played the least, in all honesty, so I don't necessarily know it as well as some of the others. But we do have that Torkoal, which is slow under Trick Room, as well as a standard Venusaur. One thing of particular note is the fact that Sludge Bomb is, I guess, the like support move of choice. There is the option for Weather Ball, and I think Weather Ball has merit in a dual weather team because of the fact that it does give Venusaur much better coverage because it gets fire and... It does give Venusaur fire and rock coverage, but I think the ability to boost special attack and also deal with fairies really outweighed a lot of the benefit of Weather Ball. And obviously I wasn't going to give up Earth Power. So the other two on the team, we do have Porygon 2 as well. I talked about how Porygon 2 shows up twice, but this is a way more support-oriented one. It's very standard Trick Room, very bulky, with the idea that, hey, we can set up Trick Room if need be and use things like Tyranitar and Torkoal and Corviknight, or we can reverse it and provide a lot of passive damage. While we do see the very common lead nowadays of Venusaur and Porygon 2 with the idea that you can either switch out Porygon 2 into Torkoal if you want to go for a fast Venusaur, or switch out Venusaur, or really leave it in to set up Porygon 2. So the common core of Torkoal, Venu, Porygon 2 is prevalent in this team. I know that a lot of people are kind of sick of it, but I think it does really suit a need for this team, and it does provide it with the coverage it really needs. And I think having sort of a good option in Trick Room is really, really important. And finally, we do have Corviknight to round things out. Mirror Armor, I think, is very important, where we do have physical attackers in both Tyranitar and Dragovich, so being able to bounce that back with Mirror Armor is huge. And the fact that we do have Sand here, we do have a way to boost Corviknight's special defense and really make it sort of a big hitter. And we do have a fairly standard set with Bulk Up, Body Press, and Iron Head. One thing of note is we did go with Protect over Roost, and I think the main reason for that is this team already has a really big ground weakness, and the appeal of Corviknight is the fact that it doesn't take damage from moves like Earthquake or Earth Power, and I felt that while it is a risk to give it up for Protect, I think it's worth it in the long run, because you do have passive recovery with leftovers. You also do have Sandstorm to boost your special defense and Bulk Up to boost your defense. So I think giving it a way to avoid getting hit by ground moves as well as do damage with the moves it has makes it really important for the team. So like I said, this team I have played the least with, but it has been very successful. It is very flexible and something worth checking out. So last team is a pretty interesting one. It's just a very sort of like balanced team. There's not really one sort of main mode, or it doesn't have necessarily a big Trick Room option. It is just very sort of flexible in its playstyle, but not as aggressively focused on Stack Attacka. So this team, I think the main aspects of it are going to be Garchomp and Moltres, with the idea that you do have weakness policy on the Moltres that you can trigger with Comfey, as well as you do have Garchomp as a fast sort of sweeper. So this team is very, very sort of setup oriented, where you have Swords Dance on Garchomp, you have Nasty Plot on Moltres, you have Iron Defense on Bronzong, and you have Beast Boost on Kartana. And it's very much about setting up and setting up slowly. And these are some of the more bulkier sets. And I think Comfey really kind of helps with that setup with Floral Healing, with the idea that you can really let these mons shine and get set up while you can provide passive recovery. Taunt, I also think, is a really big option to stop things like Trick Room if you're setting up with Garchomp, or stop any sort of moves that could try and damage them, like be it Burn or something else. Rotom, similarly, because we talked about all of the recovery, has the setup has Will-O-Wisp over Nasty Plot. And I think given the fact that this is Rotom Wash, where it's not losing special attack for going for Overheat, I think it does make more sense with the idea that, hey, we can really provide burn support to make the rest of the team bulky. It is a more bulky Moltres rather than a very offensive standard 252 with the idea of taking hits. And finally, we do have Bronzong. Bronzong is kind of our main answer to Trick Room, as this team is very fast and doesn't like Trick Room too much. It also does have Iron Defense and Body Press, and I think having this sort of really defensive option is important, and it can really work well with the rest of the team. It also does work really well with Garchomp having Earthquake, and we have 3 Pokemon that avoid it with Moltres, Rotom, and Bronzong. So you can pretty safely set up a Sword Stance and then go for big Earthquakes from there with Garchomp. Other things of note is we do have Lumberry on Garchomp, just with the idea that Will-O-Wisp is a big problem overall, and it always is really scary with something that sets up on the more physical side. So having a way to at least stop it once before Garchomp is able to deal damage is pretty great. And I'm just trying to think if there's any sort of... Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty standard group of 6, and most of what the team does should be pretty obvious for people. So once again, these are the 5 teams. I'll make sure to include all of the Pokepaste in the description below, and hopefully people get a chance to check them out. I know for the teams that I haven't featured, I will make sure to play them on the channel. And then going forward, I guess just quick about the rest of Series 9, there are a lot of fun teams that I do want to play, so I'm hoping that while these are more serious teams, we can play some sillier ones and like some more niche ones as we finish off and prep for Series 10. So yeah, give them a shot. Please let me know if you do. Would love to see other people playing the teams. And until next time, I hope all of you are wonderful, and I'll see you then.